Hello, hello, and welcome. If you are just rolling in, feel free to put your city in the chat. Love to see where everybody's coming from. I'm currently based in New York City. Peter, where are you at?
I'm up in Toronto, Canada. Hi, folks.
Hi, everybody. Snowing. Wow, that's wild. Yeah, so we'll just wait for another minute or two for people to roll in, and then we'll get started. So, again, welcome to today's presentation. We're talking today about best practices around secure data pipelines. And just a quick housekeeping note is that we're going to have a Q&A session later today. And so if you have any questions, make sure to pop into the Q&A section. And for all other comments, feel free to pop that in the chat as well. So I'll go ahead and repeat that again as we get into things. But yeah, wow. Brazil, we've got India, London, very cool, very global audience here. Nice, we got someone from Paris, France. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Joyce. I am product marketing manager here at Astronomer, and I'm really excited because Peter Chomiak is here. He's the principal product manager here at Astronomer. So Peter, I'd love for you to just kind of introduce yourself and what areas of the product you specialize in.
Yeah, for sure, Joyce. Thanks. Again, Peter Chomiak, been with Astronomer for almost 4 years now within the product management domain. I work with 2 engineering teams that ultimately look after the full stack of our managed airflow solution with Astro, everything from infrastructure all the way up to the managed experience of airflow. I also wear the product security hat here at Astronomer, so that's probably why I'm here today.
And we're excited to have you here. So again, a quick note is that if you have questions, you can go ahead and pop that in the Q&A section. We'll get to that in the Q&A section later during the session. But anything else, if you have comments, not questions, if you have comments, you can pop them in the chat box, and we may or may not see that, but yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So today we are here to go through this agenda. We're going to talk through why security matters. We'll talk through some of the real world challenges that each of us see and dive into practical best practices as well. Stuff that we've seen, with the teams that we've worked with. And then also we have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, take advantage of us while we're here. So yeah, we'll have plenty of time to go over those as well. So lastly, we'll go over just a quick summary and takeaways. So first I want to go through why security matters. And I have a feeling that most of you know why security matters, and that's why you're here. But I'll just briefly go through the basics here. So basically, Airflow is great at orchestrating workflows. But the problem is that if data is exposed and access is really open, then it becomes a security issue, right? So a lot of the data that it runs is business critical. And as I was working on these slides, I received a question that I thought was really interesting, which is if you were to lock down your database, for example, maybe your data is in Snowflake. If you lock that down and you're sure that it's protected, why do you still have to make sure that Airflow is also secure? So I'd be curious if anybody has thoughts on this. Make sure to put it in the chat. But since we have Peter here, I want to ask about your perspective. Why do you think it's important to lock down your Airflow pipelines if your other stuff is already locked down?
Yeah, great question. And this is something we get a lot from our customers. And it's namely about, why are you using something like Airflow to begin with? Well, you probably have a need to orchestrate your data ecosystem, right? And your orchestrator is probably like the sort of central nervous system of that data ecosystem, moving data around, triggering, query stored procedures, what have you. And it just simply needs to have some level of access and permissions to all these various systems to do what it needs to do. So it's super key in that respect to lock down that central nervous system that's really got access to your entire ecosystem at large.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just reiterating that, like, your pipelines are touching a lot of this real sensitive data. So whether it's like customer information, financial metrics, healthcare records, depending on the company that you work at, the sensitivity of the data can vary, right? And even if nothing goes wrong on that side, security expectations are going up, right? So you have internal audits. You have to make sure you check the boxes for SOC 2, for HIPAA, for GDPR. And so you have to make sure that you can check all of those boxes, right? And also it gets harder as you scale up. So as you're adding teams, you're adding people, your surface area expands. So this is also a big challenge that we see. And then lastly, we see that, security really is a team sport. So, you might have developers that are building pipelines, platform teams, managing infrastructure, and it's challenging to know, like, when you should pass off the ball, when you should catch the ball, and also when you're working with different services, right? You have to kind of look at the fine print of when do they take responsibility for security and when do you have to. And so it's challenging to know those things, but it's extremely critical. So before we really dive into things, we're going to do a quick poll of the audience. So we want to know, what is your biggest security challenge when it comes to data pipelines? And a lot of these things are things that we're going to cover. So for example, do you have a way to manage your secrets? Do you have a way to see what's running, what's changing, where your data is going? Maybe it's about upgrades and security patches, or audits and security reviews, right? So feel free to put your answer there. And I guess I'm curious, Peter, like, what is the most common one out of these that you usually see?
Yeah, a lot of folks, especially as they're scaling, struggle to really have a handle on what their pipelines are doing, right? So that visibility around which pipelines, which tasks are touching their various parts of their data ecosystem, and specifically, what are they doing to each of those parts of the ecosystem, and how a task touching database A affects something downstream, and what the potential pitfalls and risks are. So that's part of some of the biggest challenges our customers face today.
So that's more of like an observability thing, like when you're able to see things versus not.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But as you can imagine, in terms of like a security incident, understanding the blast radius is super important in that regard.
Yeah, like not just what went wrong, but like how did that thing that went wrong like affect everything else, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. All righty. Thanks for answering. We will just continue rolling along. We have a lot of content to get through today, but it does look like we have quite a few people either, struggling with secrets or managing access. So it looks like a little bit of each answer. Doesn't look like anybody is struggling with upgrades and security patches though, which is kind of surprising to me. But we will get into all of those things today. So practical best practices, the way that we have kind of dived into this is we go through networking, CI/CD, then access controls, and then secrets, and then visibility, specifically with like alerting and also lineage. So I'm curious, Peter, if you can talk through why we decided to arrange best practices this way. What's sort of the theme that ties all of these together?
Yeah, and in some regard, it's these things layer on each other, but are also intertwined, right? So we start with having a secure infrastructure and secure interconnectivity between your Airflow and your data ecosystem, right? That's why we start there. And then we get into how are you essentially ensuring that the code you're shipping, the pipelines you're running are production grade, are built in a secure manner, are deployed in a secure manner. And then finally, we get into like, who can see and manage these pipelines? What can these pipelines do to your data services? What are the credentials and permissions they use to access your data services? How are you handling all of these secrets and environment variables? And then finally, again, understanding the breadth of that central nervous system and what everything is, where everything's running, what it's touching, and the potential impacts of failing pipelines, especially in a security incident.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for running through that. So let's first dive into making sure that you have secure pipeline connections and also networking. So really, like Peter touched on, this is really foundational. So if you don't know where your pipelines are connecting and you can't really control how they move data, then a lot of other things in your security model start falling apart. So really the best practice here we want to hammer home is understanding how to limit where your pipelines can connect and also control how they access data. So there's kind of two components here. You have human access, but you also have pipeline access. So we kind of touch on this. How each of these are laid out is we'll go through the problems that we see with this best practice, or things that result because you aren't able to keep this best practice. And the reality is some of these best practices are difficult to do. And that's why we have companies with security incidents and things like that. But let's go ahead and talk through it, right? So one thing is that infra is pretty hard to keep current and secure. When we start with updates and patching, it's not easy to keep your infrastructure updated and patched, although it seems like from our audience, everybody's got it down here. But one of the consequences of that, right? We had the Equifax breach in 2017. 147 million people's data were leaked, and that included like names, social security numbers, birth dates, and that happened because they missed a patch and they just didn't apply it in time. And so the reality for a company as large as Equifax, it's difficult to apply patches, but that's also the gap or the delay that a lot of attackers look for. And kind of going off of the back of that, it's figuring out what are you connecting over? Are you connecting over an open network? Is there a risk of data exposure there? And then lastly, we spoke on visibility, which is can you even answer the question, right? Like, what services did Airflow connect to yesterday? Would you be able to answer that? A lot of teams can't. So that can be a bit of a blind spot when it comes to monitoring and also policy enforcement. And so really the bottom line is that you need to make sure, unrestricted network access, it does increase the chance of your data leaving systems that it shouldn't or entering systems that it shouldn't. Peter is now going to talk about how teams solve this. And, when they solve it well, this is what we typically see.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. So first and foremost, it's an investment in people, time, and processes around keeping your infrastructure patched and secured. And this is a constant, right? That needs to continually happen. And just as importantly, not only the infrastructure, but also your Airflow itself, right? The community continually puts out new versions of Airflow that contain, of course, not only features and enhancements, but also bug fixes inclusive of security bug fixes. So it's paramount that there's continual focus and efforts spent there, whether that's within a smaller data engineering team, or that responsibility is shared across DevOps teams, infrastructure teams, and data engineering teams. Secondly, it's again, Airflow being a central nervous system of your data ecosystem, you want to ensure that how it's connecting to all these data services, it's happening over secure private networks, right? Where you have traceability and control of what Airflow is connecting to, how, ports, protocols, and the like, right? So things like VPC peering, private link are great examples of how to keep those connections at the network level secure. And then finally, some organizations, whether it's regulatory compliance or contractual reasons, also have to have a way of monitoring and controlling how Airflow connects to these data systems. So think sort of inline monitoring of the data flows that are happening across their networks is also paramount. So bottom line, it's about maintaining secure infrastructure all the way up to that application layer, being Airflow, and having sensible controls around your network access, ensuring that it's locked down, it's auditable, and frankly aligned with your internal security policies is paramount. Thanks, Joyce. And with respect to Astronomer and Astro, we take some of this off your hands. So here's an example of really within a few clicks, you have that managed infrastructure to run your Airflows on. So in this example, this is this user will be creating a dedicated cluster on Azure or the other clouds of their choice, right, wherever their sort of data systems live. And from here, Astronomer takes that responsibility off your hands, manages that infrastructure, monitors it, scales it, you name it. And then with respect to networking examples, we also have two here on the right-hand side. The top one here around customer managed egress. So that's the one around having full control and visibility into your data flow. So with this feature, we basically have the capability of ensuring all data traverses your sort of hub network. And you can capture and monitor all of the traffic from your Airflows running on Astro. But if you don't need to get that fancy, you can leverage something as simple as point-to-point VPC peering and get that set up within the product with a few clicks. So just highlighting some of the Astro capabilities out of the box that solve for some of those concerns we just discussed.
Yep. And I know Airflow 3 is coming out soon, and we have a new feature coming out that we're really excited about. I wonder if you could speak to remote execution, Peter, and it relates with, like locking down your network. And it's something that, we haven't, the industry hasn't been able to really do or see. So I'd be curious if you could dive into that for us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joyce. So with our Astro hosted product, as we just showed, there's a connectivity that needs to happen between our cloud and the customer cloud, right? For the Airflow workers running on our side to access their data services. And in some cases, we have customers and prospects that just can't accept that risk whereby a third party connects to their data. And even more so, the data can not leave their environment, right? So if they do any processing on a worker as part of their data pipelines, that's basically a no-go, right? So everything from connectivity into their environment and data movement needs to happen within their four walls. So on the back of Airflow 3 and some key architectural changes with Airflow 3, we're launching this new capability around remote execution, which enables customers to run a very lightweight agent in their network that phones home for instructions around, what's my next set of tasks to run. And also as those tasks are running is sending that heartbeat information back. But everything from secrets to environment variables to DAG code to the business data that is being orchestrated is all protected and remains within the customer's four walls. So huge feature that we're launching. And it's all for all these things, right? So customers have full data control, complying with any privacy compliance regulatory needs, reduces the attack surface by eliminating any of that inbound connectivity from a third party, even though it's a trusted third party. deployment flexibility, whereby these agents can run on any hardware or cloud platform of their choice, and they can scale and size these agents as they wish. And then finally, operational efficiency, whereby, hey, we're still taking care of the sort of orchestration layer around the scheduler, the API server, the web server, and providing that sort of managed execution experience with the combination of remote execution agents.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like what kind of customer would need something like this? Like you said they have to have full data control, and also is it like something that they would need for like everything that they host, or can they kind of pick and choose?
Yeah, great question. So this is really an add-on onto our Astro product. So we already have customers that are going to choose to run some of their orchestration with the fully hosted SaaS Airflow model that exists today, and then they have some very specific use cases and data classification that they'll need a model like this, right? So this is really an unlock with existing customers, and obviously going to allow us to pursue others as well within the really any industry that deals with very highly sensitive data. So think financial services, pharmaceutical, you name it, right? And especially what's starting to emerge is, again, any industry, but those companies that are building AI products that are doing something with customer data, right? So they're building AI agents, what have you, that are interacting with their customer data, and they simply can't have a third party accessing their customer data, right? So this is another area that we're seeing some very early interest in.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's keep this train moving because we still have a lot to get through. So the next thing is making sure you're testing and deploying safely. So really this is about your CI/CD, it's about your pipeline, about how you're getting things from creation all the way to deployment, right? So it's very critical, now that we have talked about securing your infrastructure, your pipelines, it doesn't really matter if you're shipping code that breaks straight to prod. So let's talk about the problems, right? If you're deploying straight to prod, if you don't have a way to automate testing or staging, or upgrades like we've discussed are really risky and manual, the bottom line is that you don't really have this safe, repeatable path to production. And so this is one of the best practices that we recommend at Astronomer, which is to have a CI/CD pipeline to make sure your code is standardized. And this also is very effective from a security standpoint. So Peter, would love to hear how teams are doing this.
Yeah, definitely. So we have teams that first and foremost, and this is a best practice we recommend, is testing early and testing often, right? And that typically happens within your local environment, right on your machine. For users that are using our Astro CLI, which is free, right? Anyone can download and use our CLI. That gives you a local development experience. But we've run into prospects that have built all sorts of automation that would spin up airflows on like VMs, basically if think of thermal environments, right? And that takes a lot of work, obviously, to build and manage and ensure that continues to work. So generally recommending leveraging our CLI for that local development experience, and then moving that up through a non-production experience environment such as stage before hitting production. And like you just mentioned, the recommended way is obviously doing that through automation, right? So building sound CI/CD practices whereby it's not just doing the deploys, but it's also doing a lot of the checks and balances around vulnerability scans, quality scans, parsing tests of your DAG code, ensuring that, hey, will this DAG even parse on the scheduler and DAG processor, right? And having that visibility and auditability into what's making its way into production. And then finally, having a way to, a standard way to upgrade, again, that happens through a CI/CD automation, but more importantly, or just as importantly, having a way to roll back, right? Not every change is going to go smoothly. I think we've all experienced production releases which haven't gone smoothly. So having a way to roll back is super critical, right? And that takes some work, typically handled through CI/CD, but having that process in your back pocket is super key. So bottom line, having these sort of best practices greatly reduces your risk and speed of delivery. And knowing that, hey, if something does go wrong with a production release, you have a way to recover fast when that happens. So like I said, we have a couple of capabilities that can solve for this within Astro. So starting with the CLI experience. So again, this is actually free. Anybody can consume this right off of Homebrew, brew install Astro. You get the local CLI experience where you can launch a local Airflow project right on your machine and start iterating on your DAGs. Now, as you look to move that code into production, we have an available GitHub integration that basically maps your various branches or repos to deployments on Astro and keeps that consistent and moving through that automation. And last but not least, we have in-product click button rollbacks, right? So whether this is a simple configuration change to your Airflow, like an environment variable, or you actually upgraded your DAG code or the image with your dependencies, with a single click of a button, you can roll back to any previous version that you had running on Astro. And then last but not least, a simple toggle to enforce CI/CD, which is super critical. So on any of your production deployments, you can enforce the CI/CD, so that blocks any user from directly pushing code to that deployment, even if they have full admin access.
Yeah, super useful. And yeah, I just want to reiterate that the Astro CLI is free to use, and so many users get a lot out of using it. It speeds up their development time, and you can press one command and it gives you the entire folder structure for testing and things like that. So highly recommend that all of you guys check it out. And next best practice that we have is all about access controls and identity integration. So you've locked down where your pipelines run, what they connect to. Now you have to control who has access, and both to your Airflow environment and also the systems that your pipelines are touching. And so it's figuring out who can see what, who can connect to what, and can you quickly turn it off if something changes. So the problems that we see is that a lot of users have broad access. So their permissions are not scoped. And often this happens, maybe it's a smaller company and they just want to make sure people are moving fast. They have access to everything. But at some point you have to ask, is a junior developer supposed to be editing production DAGs or viewing logs with sensitive customer information or triggering critical jobs? Secondly, not connecting to your IDP. And if your access isn't connected to this, maybe somebody is changing teams or leaving the company, they might have outdated access that could really affect things down the road. And then lastly, pipeline access isn't scoped either. So you have the human access, but you also have pipeline access because pipelines also use long-lived credentials. They also use hard-coded secrets. So it's making sure that you can track and also scope that access and make sure that it's time limited. So it's an easy blind spot to miss. And so the bottom line here is that you can't really be in a place where you can't have too much access or you don't have enough visibility. And a lot of this is because I feel like a lot of people feel like, oh, I want to speed up our workflows. And so you get rid of a lot of the access, a lot of the secret protection type thing. And then you realize that it causes problems down the road. And ultimately it slows you down in the future. I had a CMO in the past who used to always say to us that smooth is slow and slow is fast. So that's really the thought process there. So yeah, Peter's now going to walk through how teams solve this with automation and also having better guardrails.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. So first and foremost, the sort of human element to your airflows. So it's super critical to consider how you're, in some ways, architecting who has access to your airflows, the level of access they have to airflows, and namely the DAGs and tasks that are running your business, right? It's important to give some thought into how your teams, your lines of businesses have the necessary, controls and permissions to those airflows without introducing risk into the organization. And typically, customers want to manage, their user base through sort of a centralized identity management platform. So this is where it's key to integrate with tools like your IDP, like an Okta, for that single sign-on experience. So users not, managing credentials on a sticky pad or what have you, and they're, it's a smooth login transition into Airflows. And then for the more advanced users around, the auto provisioning and deprovisioning of users as they join a company, as they join a team, and leave that team or leave that company. That's where SCIM comes into play around automatic user and group provisioning and deprovisioning. So that's the sort of human element. And then just as importantly, if not more importantly, is how your pipelines, your tasks are accessing your data services, right? Sometimes we see, like you said, long-lived, hard-coded credentials, definitely not recommended. Those can very easily leak, get into the wrong hands, whether that's internally or, an external bad actor, and cause some serious damage and reputational harm to your company. So this is where, we typically recommend using scoped, short-lived credentials, something like a workload identity and the federation capability that cloud providers give us for accessing your data services from your pipelines. Ultimately, this means, access is tightly controlled for both people and pipelines, and you have a lot of auditability and control and really logging around how people and pipelines are interfacing with your data ecosystem. So here's a couple examples of how we make that super simple in Astro. We have the capability to manage users and teams, again, through SSO, through SCIM, and also giving you the capability to create custom roles with very granular permissions down to the Airflow level, enabling you to, again, be very specific around what individual users and teams can and should do within an Airflow environment. And then on the right-hand side, the workload identity configuration seems super simple, but again, very critical in ensuring that pipelines have only the necessary identity and permissions required for the execution of those tasks, no more, no less, and again, using short-lived credentials to do that.
Awesome. So the next best practice that we have is all about secrets, right? So we talked about access, but it's also important that your credentials aren't hard-coded, that your API keys aren't shared in Slack, or that they're floating around. And one of the companies that I worked at early on, that will go unnamed, we used to pass around, like keys in like a little Excel sheet. So it was nice for when I was onboarding, but this is definitely not a best practice that we recommend. So some of the problems we see, right, that I've mentioned is having secrets in code or in your Git, sharing it informally in a way that's not secure, and also not having an easy way to rotate. And so something that happens is you have secret sprawl, where you have all of these secrets all over the place and you have no idea who has secrets to what, and that means you also can't rotate them. So the bottom line really is that unmanaged secrets, they increase your surface or your attack surface, and it also makes your incident response slower and messier. So Peter, love to hear how teams handle this in a better way, and hopefully it doesn't involve spreadsheets.
Yes, leveraging a central secrets manager is paramount here, right? This gives you a lot of auditability, control, access, and rotation capability, as you mentioned, right? And fortunately, Airflow has a lot of capabilities to integrate with secrets managers. So everything from secrets to environment variables, you can log and reference from your pipelines, inclusive of IAM roles, right? So these are, again, cloud provider native capabilities around how you access and secure task to data service access. So instead of hardcoded credentials, using these to provide that short-lived credential versus static credentials. So by doing all this, right, you greatly reduce your exposure. You have clean, audible workflows, and frankly, faster remediation in the cases of security incidents. You're able to rotate keys, what have you, to get yourself out of a bind. And of course, with Astro, we make this heck of a lot easier for y'all. So starting with the environment manager, this is a feature on Astro whereby you can create top-level connections, environment variables, and do that in a centralized way, and basically push that down into individual Airflow deployments. So this is where someone that's more privileged can create these connections and basically grant access to Airflow connections, so that your data engineers, your developers don't have to be setting these up manually or have any sort of knowledge of these keys, these values, and deal with that complexity and security. And then, of course, like I said, we integrate with all of the typical secret managers out there across AWS, Google, Azure, and of course, HashiCorp Vault.
Yep. All of the top providers there. So for the next best practice, we have getting ahead of pipeline failure. So this is where we kind of enter into observability and being able to see what's happening in your data pipelines. So the best practice here is being able to know when things break and understanding what has happened that has led to that failure. So this is where it becomes more of a security and reliability issue, and knowing, why it failed and what it impacted. So the problems we see here are that there's too much of a gap in terms of failures aren't being evaluated fast enough. And then when they do catch failures, the debugging is incredibly slow. It's very manual. You're basically triaging all of these logs, trying to figure out what happened. And that's very slow, especially when you're under pressure, right? And then the impact is unclear. So you might find the root reason, but you're not sure whether or not it might happen again. So without having these alerts and this context, you're not sure if every issue becomes a fire drill or not, because you just haven't been able to standardize that or figure out what's happening. So Peter's now going to talk about how teams sort of shift from this reactive approach to being a little bit more proactive.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. So number one, it's important to understand the impact, DAG failures and task failures have on your business, and that will inform things like SLAs, right? But as a starting point, let's just set alerts for DAG failures or delays, and that can sort of move into missed SLAs, right? It's important to not be blind to failures. These things happen. And it's a mechanism where, your technical teams and maybe even your business is notified around failures before it becomes a bigger issue, like, a missed regulatory report or what have you. Some advanced capabilities with Astro is the ability to generate log summaries, which we'll demonstrate in a little bit. But this is something, some of our more advanced customers have done in the past, whereby, they know about particular errors that are generated by their task, and they'll actually create, sort of a smart, humanly readable errors in the output to help them with the debugging process. And then finally, it's having sort of longer lived visibility into your DAG health and performance over time to understand as you're, adding tasks or adding, data or schemas or what have you into an established ecosystem and DAG, how does that affect the health and performance of that, process over time is super key to understand. So by doing this, sensitive data stays private, even if something breaks. And when that does happen, hopefully you're aware of that before, a bigger issue were to occur, and so on and so forth. So a couple quick screen grabs from our Astro Observe product around how we, give you these sort of insights and controls out of the box around tracking SLA. So over time on the right-hand side, you see the different bar graphs tracking DAG and task performance around durations, right? You also see SLA hit and misses. So you set an SLA for when you expect a particular DAG or task to complete and whether or not that's happening over a period of time. Log summaries, again, using some machine learning, we're able to translate error logs in tasks into humanly readable root causes, and again, do that at scale.
Awesome. Yeah, so I believe this is the final best practice, and it's all about tracking lineage and metadata. So if something breaks in a pipeline, you get an alert, but now you're kind of asking yourself, okay, what's the upstream dependency that caused this, and what downstream jobs are affected? So it's about being able to answer those questions fast. And this does kind of go along with the last best practice on alerting, right? So the problem is that if you don't have a view of these dependencies, pipelines don't exist in isolation. So we can't see upstream and downstream. It's hard to know what's happening, right? And then also, like we spoke before, having slow root cause analysis. So without having a sense of lineage or metadata, how are you supposed to know besides just like log scraping or trying to figure out through tribal knowledge? And then you also have fragmented audit trails. So a lot of times actions live in multiple places, whether it's DAG runs, some might be in Git history, some are in like Slack messages. So it's hard to trace what changed, who triggered it, and when. And the bottom line here is that it's just really hard to figure out what's going on, and it takes too much time to figure that out. So Peter is now going to talk through how teams get ahead of this.
Yeah, definitely. So what we've seen with customers that really are sort of in the advanced use case system where this is key to their business and understanding the dependencies between DAGs and tasks, and again, the impact it could have if something were to go wrong, especially in a security incident. We're typically finding that they have to integrate with other tools to track, number one, to ingest and track lineage across their ecosystem. And that can be hard. Number one, getting approval for a net new tool, getting two completely separate tools interconnected and doing so in a meaningful and accurate way. But ultimately, there's a lot of value in doing so, right? It gives you that longer lived visibility, auditability around run history, and understanding, ebbs and flows as your data ecosystem is changing. And last but not least, any sort of user activity is also logged and audited, especially for those sort of compliance and security needs. So ultimately, having this sort of longer lived visibility, you get faster debugging, better controls, and really smooths out the whole audit journey, which I don't think any of us enjoy, but it's necessary to stay in business.
It's true.
With Astro and the Observe product, you get this out of the box, right? Because your pipelines are running on Astro, all of that lineage is already tracked and stored, enabling us to do a number of things. So on the left-hand side, you see a graph for what we call a data product. And a data product is made up of a number of inputs, which can be an asset, think like an S3 bucket, a database, what have you, a number of DAGs and tasks, right? And all of these things combine to something on the far right. And in this case, this is a regulatory report. But you can see how everything is so connected and everything has to happen just right for that final product. And we enable you to see all this at scale over time, which the top right corner is showing. And then finally, audit logging capability, whereby you have full visibility into everything and anything happening within your Astro environment and across all your Airflows down to individual user actions.
Awesome. Yeah, and so now we're entering into Q&A. So if you haven't put your questions in, highly recommend that you do so. And I'll quickly go over the best practices that we covered today. So we started out with networking and figuring out your connections, your pipeline connections, then your CI/CD, what's the process of deploying your code, and then access controls and identity, who is able to access different services and things like that, and also secrets, who is accessing the credentials and the secrets. And lastly, kind of zooming out into visibility, and how do you know when things fail? Do you know why they fail? And also, do you know what it affects? And that's kind of what we landed on with Lineage. So that is a quick little overview. And now we will go into questions. So we got quite a few questions. You can follow along in the Q&A tab. Let's just start with the first one. So somebody is also really excited about remote execution. They want to know what the driver for remote execution is, Peter.
Yeah, great question. We touched upon some of this, but just to reiterate, right? The primary reason we solved for remote execution and are shipping it next week with the launch of Airflow 3 is to ensure that customers with highly classified data, highly secure data, have guarantees that data doesn't leave their environment and that there's no exposure outside of their controls, right? So with remote execution agents being installed and managed by their teams, right? So to be very clear, this is something that the customer managed agents running on their infrastructure. As those pipelines and tasks are running and whatever they're doing to their data, that is all happening within their environment and within their controls, right? And then the second reason, very related, is that there is no third-party access into their network to do that, right? These agents are phoning home for work. Hey, is there what next set of tasks should I run? They're getting that information back from the scheduler and then also responding back with that information. And then thirdly, we also have customers, again, this is a very emerging space, especially within AI, whereby customers are doing, say, a lot of machine learning type work with Airflow. And there's benefits to running those kind of tasks on GPU infrastructure, for example. And they may have a large GPU cluster or have some really good pricing with a particular cloud provider around GPU pricing. So they're able to run these agents and these workers on that GPU cluster and do all that compute within a task on compute that is really made for that kind of operation. So for those three reasons, we've built remote execution and we're super excited about it. And I think we're seeing that excitement within our customer base as well.
Yeah, thanks for diving into that, Peter. Let's see. One thing I want to highlight too for everybody is that you can go ahead and upvote the questions that you also want answered. So go ahead and do that as well, because we have maybe like 4 minutes here in the Q&A. But don't worry, if we don't get to your question here live, we will definitely reach out in the next few days to do so. But for now, let's keep on chugging. This says, my company is only approved to use Azure. Can I still use Astro?
Yes, yes, and yes. Astro supports all 3 public cloud providers. I believe we showed a screenshot earlier of an example of creating a dedicated cluster for Airflows on Azure, but you can choose any of the 3. So tons of flexibility with respect to what cloud you want to run on. And not only that, you're not only sort of shoehorned into one specific cloud once you start. Astro, think of it as a single pane of glass. If you have a multi-cloud strategy, you can actually create Airflow deployments across 2 cloud providers or all 3, if you're that advanced, and manage everything from your users to your pipelines in one central place across many clouds.
Yep. Someone here is asking, what are some common security pitfalls you've seen, and how can teams proactively avoid them? That's a pretty chunky question, but maybe, one common security pitfall that you've seen, or like the main one that you've seen.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is really around secrets handling, which is somewhat related to another question I think from the audience. And a secret doesn't just have to be like a key or a password as part of an Airflow connection, right? Some customers consider environment variables as being sensitive data. So being able to, and this is something Airflow supports, is also thinking about how you're securing your environment variables within a secrets manager is very possible, right, and supported. So having a strategy around, again, how you're securing your secrets from Airflow connections to environment variables is something that we've seen time and time again. And again, we're fortunate that OSS Airflow supports a variety of secrets managers, and of course Astro does out of the box as well.
Yep. Let's see. Let's maybe do one more. So this question is asking, where is Airflow hosted in Astro, and how do workers talk to my data services?
Yeah, great question. So Astro is a fully SaaS product. So everything from your schedulers, your web servers, your workers and triggers are running in Astronomer's Cloud. Now, that said, we have a couple options around levels of isolation, right? So if you need basically dedicated compute, dedicated network, we can support all that across all 3 clouds. We have that option. So everything is running on Astronomer's Cloud. And then, like I said, we have a variety of mechanisms to connect privately to your data services, whether that's in the cloud or on premise, right? So everything from peering to private link to site-to-site VPN, we can do it all, and we can support that across all 3 cloud providers. That said, with remote execution, it's a slightly different model, right? Whereby the workers run in your environment and are managed by your team, but are sort of have that phone home capability to pick up work and send details back.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sending in your questions and being engaged. We will definitely get to those questions and get back to you if we didn't have time to address those today. So just real quick, we wanted to talk about security with Astro. On the left-hand side here, we see a lot of the things within our platform, right? Like we use TLS encryption. We have strict access controls for ourselves. And also we have resilient infrastructure across multiple availability zones. And then we also have the enterprise-ready security features as well that we discussed today. So everything from role-based access control to remote execution that we spoke on a lot today, and that's coming out, in the next week or two. And then everything to customer managed secrets and workload identity if you want to integrate with cloud native IAM. And then lastly, private networking options. So we kind of scale to the level of the security that you need, but we definitely have the fundamentals covered. And if you want to learn more, you can definitely go to astronomer.io. There's also a little box that's just popped up. So if you want to book a demo, you can go ahead and do that. But you also, if you want to try Astro today, you get $300 in free credits during your 14-day trial. So you can go ahead and go to astronomer.io/LP/sign up, and you can go ahead and just start trying Astro today. But yeah, thanks again, all of you, for joining us today. Peter, any last words for our audience or last takeaway?
I think what you started off with the call around, this is something that needs continual effort and investment in around securing your pipelines, your Airflow infrastructure, and frankly, your data ecosystem. We need to continue and invest in doing so because the stakes are only getting higher, the demands are only getting harder. So this needs to be in the forefront of any design and decisions that we make.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thanks again for everyone for attending. This recording will be up, I'm sure, somewhere at some point. And if you have any questions, you want a copy of these slides, make sure you can reach out to marketing at astronomer.io, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.